collapsing the punitive contingencies and not bringing in anything else, we're failing to teach quick, easy reading, the kind that would make it reinforcing to read something. And we are not also making subject matters important enough to people that care about learning something new about things. I think this can be done. I've had a hand in developing a reading series where you use immediate contrived reinforcers for evaluation of sentences or just words and so on, so that there is a fascination. The kids like this. They work with it. They're always discovering that they have read something correctly, and in doing so, they do learn to read, and fluently enough, I believe, so that eventually they can begin to read for pleasure. But to begin with, you can't read for pleasure. Run, spot, run. That's not pleasurable, and it's absurd to expect that you can design primers in reading which are going to be naturally interesting to a child compared with television or something of that kind. But you can build in contrived contingencies that will get the child through the early stages of reading to the point of the kind of fluency which makes reading a pleasure.
Is the fact that so many people learn to read under an adversive system it all related to the fact that people don't seem to read when the adversive system is no longer there? When
it comes to an end, you just stop. This is something you've had to do. Now you don't have to do it, so you don't do it. I think that's very largely what is involved. Moreover, in these aversive contingencies, you don't learn to read very fluently, and that's a terribly important thing. It's like playing the piano. If you never play well, you don't play. You don't get any fun out of it. But if you learn to play well, then the natural reinforcers of the music you're producing begin to come through. If you read hesitantly, sounding things out and so on, you're not going to get any fun out of that, and you'll stop as soon as you have to. Then as soon as you're permitted to.
Let's take another issue. What about developing people to be deeply concerned about their fellow man? Concern for his physical welfare,
yes.
Concern for the style of life he has, the quality of life he has. How might the school work on that?
Well, that is actually very close. I thought you probably were going to ask me, why is it better for a culture to develop the individual rather than allow him to sit stoned all his life, though happy? And I think the answer to that is that the culture is stronger if each member develops himself as fully as possible. And he would be most able to meet emergencies. He would make progressive changes and improvements in the culture. He would develop better art forms, better science, and so on. But I think you have to take the future of the culture into account. And a culture which allows everyone just to sit and watch professional football with a few lottery tickets and waiting for the next number to be reported and drunk half the time, that's a bad culture because it would not be able to tackle any problem and solve the problem well, as people are not developing their natural interests. And I think this is the criterion, that you want to build the individual so that he is most effective, most capable of doing what may need to be done to survive, and for the culture to survive. And I think it's up to education to build into the individual those behaviors which will most likely work for the survival of the culture. I think that's the only ultimate value that we face. Happiness is not the ultimate value. In general, it's better than unhappiness, because people who are happy are likely to be they're likely to be developing as much as possible towards something better. But there are instant happinesses of one kind or another where that is not true. And simply to say that culture is best in which people are happiest, it isn't true, because you could have a very happy culture that would go down the drain the next time an emergency arose.
Let's return to the notion of the school developing people as people, and take, for example, the Adlerian notion of social interest, or being concerned with one's fellow man and working for the betterment of other human beings. What can the school do to develop this kind of humanistic value?
Well, what does society do in the first place? The school is doing it for society. How do you move from a culture in which each man is out entirely for himself to a culture in which the individual takes another person into account, and then perhaps eventually reaches that stage expressed by John Donne in a very famous passage, "No man is an island. We are all part of the main. Never send to know for whom the bell tolls. When someone dies, a part of you dies. The welfare of everyone is your good." You see. If you can put that across, then that culture is going to be strong because it will disseminate its goods. Everybody will have the support of everybody else. I think it's no question that a culture which manages to make its members help each other and take the good of each other into account is a strong culture. But it's not the best culture. Now that's because the greatest good of the greatest number isn't an ultimate kind of value. It's great right now, but it may miss the future, which is a terribly important thing. In a culture in which we all are brothers and are each other's keepers, and we keep each other well, you see, this might not be developing at all. It could be static. It could be, this would mean simply give everybody a bottle of whiskey a week and a television set, and that would be what I do for you, is to give you all of this. But you would not be developing. And the greatest good of the greatest number has got to be oriented toward the future. And if we simply settled for thoughtfulness about our fellow men, we may be missing the boat.
Clearly, this raises the issue of how much diversity can a society tolerate and how much power should be given to the school. For example, the rebel today, the young person who's dropping out, as opposed to engaging themselves in a culture where the school is a purveyor of middle-class values. How do you design a system to tolerate and to enhance, indeed, the rebel?
Well, the rebel is a figure which has a place only in an imperfect system. And things are bad, someone's got to change them. And we call him a rebel because he's making changes. If you simply go into a school system and say, look, here's a better way of teaching, why don't you use it? Nobody calls you a rebel. They call you a rebel when you attack the present system, not because you put something better in its place. Now, I think a good culture would have very few rebels, and a perfect culture would have none. And that would not be any great loss. We value the rebel because our cultures have been so bad in the past. But to say, what would you do in a perfect culture about the rebel is about like saying to Isaac Newton, what would you do about a body that goes the wrong way in a gravitational field? There wouldn't be rebels in a perfect culture. Well, that's something to dream about and not to talk about, really, because we're not going to have that kind of culture. But the rebel has been someone who has done something in the past, and he's had to do it by breaking into the present system, so we call him a rebel. I think in the future we won't have rebels, we'll have improvers, but they won't have to rebel, they won't have to attack, they will simply change and move things into the future. If you don't like the way of life someone is handling you now, there are three things you can do. You can destroy it and try to build something else in the ashes. You can walk away from it and set up another culture of your own somewhere else. That's the utopian escape pattern. Or you can take the present culture and improve it bit by bit. And that, I think, is what a technology of behavior is most likely to do at the present time. I think we can now improve teaching practices, we can improve incentive conditions, we can improve the ways in which people are induced to behave well with respect to each other and so on.
What do you mean by behaving well with respect to each other?
Well, not robbing each other or stealing from each other and so on, the kinds of things that allow you to spend the day without watching over your shoulder to see who's going to knife you and so on.
What about in the positive sense, in the non-destructive sense?
Well,
enhancing the individual.
Yes, well, this is a kind of thing which has made culture strong. When you get people who teach so that other people are more effective, you have an example of that. When you get someone who designs an incentive system, not just for the profits he's going to make out of it, but to produce the goods the culture needs, and you have that, because after all, if people need food, then an agricultural system is a way of helping others because they consume the food you produce. You may do it for selfish